Welcome to Finance Village, the podcast for financial advisors and professionals who want to stay ahead of the curve, navigate an ever-changing industry, and work together to deliver better outcomes for our clients while making sure to build our own success and hopefully make our own lives easier. Today, we're going to be diving into an issue that strikes at the foundation of professional advice in Canada, the growing regulatory and policy pressure on private business structures. Corporations, partnerships, trusts, they're not necessarily just tax tools. They're the frameworks that financial professionals across several different disciplines rely on to help clients achieve their goals. They create jobs, they manage risk, grow wealth, they fund retirement, transfer assets across generations, and I would submit to you even have a big impact on driving innovation. But the policy shifting and what's used to be considered legitimate planning is increasingly labeled as avoidance or abuse. The very tools that have supported entrepreneurship and risk taking are being scrutinized and restricted and in some cases dismantled. So, we have an amazing guest today in Trevor Parry, a leading tax strategist, legal expert, and advocate for Canada's private business community. Trevor is known and respected by some of the greatest minds in finance across the industry, some that I know and some that I don't. Trevor's work spans in tax and legal design and legislative commentary and a high-level advisory for private enterprise owners and their professional teams. And his insights help financial professionals understand not just what's changing, but how to advise effectively in the changing environment. And if there's anything I should add there that I missed, Trevor, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll get to
I
the
don't.
opening
Depends who you
question.
talk to, Sheldon. And it's a pleasure to be here. I would probably tell people when it comes to tax planning and paying as little as possible, I'm a zealot. I wear that badge of honor proudly. I'm wearing checks today in homage to my good friend Kim Moody, who lives in the same city as you do. So hopefully Kim will tune in at some point. I'm usually Mr. Pinstripes. But no, I mean it's a thank you for the kind introduction. My day, other than doing what my wife tells me, is fighting tax, doing it prudently, talking to folks, advisors, accountants, lawyers, clients about what's possible, what's not possible, where's the risk, and where are we going in terms of policy. It's not in a good way, even with the new, it's the new old government. Certainly what we're hearing from finance and murmurs about things like wealth tax and stuff like that, or tax on equity of your home are certainly foreboding. Whether they come to fruition or not remains to be seen. So.
Well, I'll give a quick shout out to Kim Moody. Anyone that is not following him and yourself on LinkedIn is missing out. And you certainly don't just do it as an expert, but from what I've seen as a bulldog, and I do like to
Oh yeah,
consider
yeah.
myself in my own space in lending and mortgages as a bulldog for my clients. I'm a huge advocate for collaborative and independent financial advice. And one of the slogans that I regularly see on your LinkedIn, on your website, that I just want to quickly just get you to kind of clarify a bit is, the Leviathan must be stopped. Expound on that a bit for us.
Well, I'm going to be sending you T-shirts and hats because I just had merch made. Leviathan is a biblical sea monster, and certainly if you go to Canada's Wonderland, that's what the roller coaster is trying to harken back to.
My
For me,
first and only roller coaster ride, and I'll never do another.
I'm too old now. I
Yeah.
love roller coasters. I'm 58. I almost played rugby last weekend, and I haven't put the boots away forever. And of course, with booze and Advil, anything is possible. But the Leviathan that I'm talking about is Thomas Hobbes' quintessential book on political treatise, the first great book on social contract. And the concept was that you as an individual would cede your individual freedom to the state, the sovereign, for protection. Lovely idea, I guess. But what's actually happened is that Leviathan has grown and grown and grown. So the state becomes overarching, all encompassing, sucking the oxygen out of the room and all of your money, and provides very little in terms of any real support or benefit to guys like you or me, and I would argue for most of the population. Canada is in the G7, as far as I'm concerned, as bad as any of the continental European countries, and in fact worse in certain instances. And the fact that our brilliant electorate has returned a liberal government, to be, to less than iambic pentameter, it's like changing your shirt when you've crapped your pants. So we can digress into a political discussion whenever you want, because that's what I do. Because inexorably tax policy, tax planning, it has a political bent to it. I mean, there are policy decisions being made in Ottawa that have tremendously adverse effects on the entrepreneurial class, and in terms of crushing aspiration in Canada. I think that's our worst scenario. And you had the whole Donald Trump kerfuffle where he's talking about the 51st state. And I'm, as you said, a bulldog. I'm Tony Chapman says I'm a freedom fighter. I challenge Canadians to say, look, are you really better off than you are or were 10 years ago? The only people who are getting a check or work for government or just recently showed up. It's Canada is not what it was, and so I'm be quite blunt about it. People ask me, would I choose statehood or Canada now? I'll take statehood. It's not real. I mean, Trump was joking, and what Trump was, if you look through the bluster, and particularly what his lieutenants were talking about, most of what he wants is good for Canada. He wants energy superpower. Pull your weight on defense. End of dairy marketing. Why are we paying $8 for butter for 10,000 farmers in Quebec? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Access to banking. Could you imagine what would happen to capital generation in this country if American banking was allowed to come up here? Airlines. Why does
Well,
it
we have
cost
some, well, we
$800
certainly
to
have
fly
some
to Montreal?
competition. The competition in Canada is just, we're 10 years behind the US. The US is a
Well,
little
at
bit
least.
UK, but I mean, I talk about it with my clients all the time. And sorry to interrupt, but just that one point I want to stick on for a moment is that the lack of competition, they have so much competition. The intent to do business in the US is so much stronger. And in Canada, we just look at those five big logos. And I've been banking with the CABIC for
Oh
30
yeah.
years. And it's really, we really empower the monopoly that they have. And the Canadian Bankers Association doesn't help at all.
No.
They don't seem to understand that it's to their benefit, to their own benefit, um, for innovation, for a lot of data exchange, for doing business to open up. But I mean, I
Sheldon,
a lot of those big wigs they're not good at long math.
it's been inculcated into our children for 2 generations. Profit is a bad word in Canada. Teaching our own history in a positive fashion to our kids is a bad thing. Teaching civics, basic fundamentals of the traditions of our institutions. Canadians, for the most part, don't trust their institutions at all. And again, however, for some reason, scared by the CBC and the CTV, because it's all the same pablum, they've gone off and elected the consigliere for the Toronto Bronfmans. See what happens, right? I read his book, as I said in one of my rants. I enjoyed it. I always worry about anyone who uses the word normative. It's not a normal word. But we have attacked productivity because we've attacked aspiration. You had COVID come along, and people sit at home. Stephen Harper called them old stock Canadians. Well, a good number of them are sitting on their ass. They'll fight to have, if you're going to make them come to the office more than 3 days a week. I mean, that's great for traffic in Ottawa, but it's not great for a country trying to grow. We've
Not
crushed
productivity.
aspiration.
I'm a big advocate for going to the office, and I like my work family. I love going to see the people that I work with and get out of the house. And
Same
it's a,
here.
it's,
I
I
get that.
mean,
Well,
I'm
I
a
mean, I
huge
work out of the
advocate.
house. I'm getting an office in the fall because, I mean, yeah, I want to interact with people. I'm old school. I still go to see clients. I enjoy seeing people. Zoom's wonderful, or Teams and all that kind of stuff. Once you've met someone, right? I wear a tie. I dress like a curmudgeon intentionally. It's out of respect. I'm a clothes pig. I like doing it, but we've lost that. I mean, I remember what my dad handed me Robert Ringer books when I was a kid about you dress for success and all that kind of stuff. Uh, and it holds true. Um, we have lost business culture in this country, and then we've lost entrepreneurialism, aspiration, and we look to these giant organizations thinking that one day they're like St. Paul on the road to Damascus are going to wake up and discover treating the customer properly. Like anyone who's gone through the arduous meat grinder of an Air Canada flight will understand that their motto unofficially is, "We're not happy till you're not happy." That's the level of Canadian service. I mean, I get in trouble because I did a thing from Florida where I said, go to Buc-ee's in Florida or Texas and then walk into a Canadian Tire. And I know a whole bunch of Canadian Tire owners and they're good entrepreneurs, but good luck trying to find someone to help you in
Well,
that
let me
store.
comment on that for 1 second because boy, do I talk about one element that a lot, and boy, have I experienced the other profoundly recently. So I'm always talking to clients, who do you bank with? Who's your advisor? I'm really big on the holistic collaboration. I
Yeah,
really want to advocate for that independent advice. I want to know what their experience is at the bank, and I'm always asking them, what's your experience at this institution with this professional? And they say, well, I haven't had any problems lately. You have, this is the new standard, is I haven't had problems. They're never able to say
yeah,
it's good, it's great, anything
yeah.
like that. When I
It
went
wasn't.
down, sorry, go ahead.
It wasn't awful. That's the standard.
Yeah, no, it wasn't awful. And that's now they're satisfied with that because they've had so many bad experiences. I went down for Christmas to Florida to see some family. We went over to Tennessee to one of my brother-in-law's friends. They all flew in from Guyana. They're Guyanese. A lot of
Food. I've got a
US,
Guyanese friends.
so much business happening there right now. And there's a lot of people flying back and forth for the oil. And one of the guys that he knew was over in Tennessee. So we did the 10-hour drive. What a wonderful, wonderful experience I had hanging out. But I'll tell you, I got to go to my first experience at Chick-fil-A,
Oh yeah.
and I stopped at two of them on the way because the first one was so damn good. And I'm telling you, the customer service was so outstanding. I couldn't even fathom how a fast food restaurant, like they were just, everybody there was smiling. They offered I told her it was my first time. She gave me like a little test of a couple things. They were so kind. They brought their service over. The bathrooms were pristine. There was like layers. Like I felt like very emotional about it. I said to the lady, you got to give me an email. And then the same experience at the next one. So I come back to Calgary. I find out there's a Chick-fil-A and I'm just totally, totally pumped. And uh, I went there one time, and what an incredibly brutal experience. Everything about it. The order was wrong. They were texting on the phone where they were taking my order. Everything about the experience, I never, ever, ever went back. And I thought now, I came back thinking Canada, that Chick-fil-A was my new religion.
I still think there's some in the restaurant world. I mean, I don't get out like I used to because we got little kids and dinners at 5 o'clock at Eastside Mario's or something like that, which they enjoy. You still get some okay service in the service industry. I was a bouncer, so I always tell people I was the sharp end of the hospitality
Now
business.
you're even saying it. Well, you still get some decent service sometimes. So
Some,
you're
but if you go to, for instance, I have a love hate with Toronto. I'm from there. I'm a Habs fan. I despise the Leafs. I enjoy every year when they get knocked out, the self-immolation that goes on in the media. But I miss the Danforth in Toronto, the Greek area. Service is fantastic. It's like the Village. It's great. There's still a few restaurants that I love to go to, and that's what I miss about Toronto is like the holes in the wall, the Indian and Chinese places. Because out in Ancaster, where I am, we don't. I mean, I joke and say our idea of ethnic food is cheeseburgers, but it's great here. But you still find it, but you're not going to find it for the most part in mainstream Canadian culture. And again, we're crushing the work ethic in this country. So, for instance, I don't like Tim Hortons. I never did. I think the coffee is a laxative. But if you're going to go there because it's this great brand, Canadian brand, you're going to find that the vast majority of people working in Tim Hortons are a lot of them are on the temporary foreign workers program, which is intended for farm workers, and that has to go back to that. I don't blame these people for coming in. They bust their ass and they work hard, but why aren't Canadians doing it? Canadians aren't doing it because after COVID they're sitting at home, and a lot of them still live on checks. I would love to see Doug Ford launch a task force in Ontario to go after the doctors who have signed the letters to get people onto the Ontario Disability Program because the waste and fraud is profligate. They're sitting at home. And what happens when, kids, because right now we're at the end of school, my kids finish tomorrow. They're young, but what happens to all the high school kids who need a summer job? And Tim's might have been that place. Or we can name Walmart. There are all kinds of companies. And they're not going to get those jobs because the government of Canada is subsidizing foreign workers to come in and work at those places. That's not racist. That's ludicrous. You're crushing the work ethic. You're crushing the work ethic before they even get started. Like, we are going and doing absolutely everything that is wrong. Like, I'd love to find out who wrote the playbook for this, because it can't be anything other than intentional. I mean, you're crushing aspiration. You're
Well, and
crushing work ethic.
it's the plan going forward, I think, is
Yeah,
to bring in tons and tons and tons of more people, which,
yeah.
I see that there's advocacy within those advisory boards and the political level to lower the filters, which are already
We are. And
left.
I've got friends, this sounds standard, but I got a ton of clients who are from all over the world, and they're saying, shaking their head, saying, "Don't. This isn't. You're not bringing the right folks in." I mean, I'll get in trouble for this, but I think our crime rate is directly related to it. The car thefts and all that kind of stuff that we're seeing right across the country. And this is, we're not really going to talk about the election, but I think had Pierre Poilievre played the immigration card and played it hard, he would be prime minister today.
Well, I'm shocked that there's even car thie I mean, I thought I thought when Burt Reynolds movies were done, that's when cars were no longer being stolen. I don't even understand how that's possible. That's a whole
Oh, it's like
different
Ontario. I
conversation.
mean, it's going on in insane amounts in Ontario, but who knows? I mean, it's just another part and parcel of horrible policy. But as you get back to sort of crushing entrepreneurialism, I mean, tax is the first. That's the great, Thor's hammer of crushing spirit, and I see that all the time. I mean, I've had the pleasure to know Conrad Black for a number of years, and I had Conrad speak at an event a number of years ago at the Military Institute in Toronto. And he said, short of war, there's no justification for the state to take more than half of what you make. Well, in 8 out of 10 provinces, they're doing that. You're from Nova Scotia, and I like bashing the premier there because he says he's a conservative, and that's just not the case. He introduced an infinitesimally tiny tax cut, and you have the second highest marginal tax rate in Canada, Newfoundland being the highest. So in Nova Scotia, you wonder why you can't get a doctor. It's a beautiful place. It's got friendly people. They're idiots when it comes to voting, because how Sean Fraser, you can walk and talk and chew gum at the time, let alone get it reelected, is terrifying. But you have a scenario now where you get 6 months of winter, and people are looking at Florida, where you can file a joint return with your spouse and you don't hit the 37% top bracket until almost $1 million of income at a Canadian dollar adjusted basis. Newfoundland's 55. And I can tell you, having done lots of work out there and love going there, what's the reality? What's the response to those tax rates? It's not compliance. It's a cash economy. That's what's happening. The government is driving that underground. It's profligate in those provinces. And it's a direct anathema to productivity. Like, I get in trouble as an upper Canadian Eastern bastard, whatever you want to say, but I think the Maritimes should be one province. Or there should be some kind of interoperability in terms of the economies. There's none. It's every county has its dog catcher and assistant dog catcher, and it's just going to go on and on and on forever. I mean, if you want, again, Ontario is not pure, because I mean, if you look at the city of Toronto, the single greatest example of complete inept government, to the point where I've said they should eliminate the entire level of government and run it as a ministry. Uh, they can't. They cannot do anything properly. It's, again, if they must have a playbook somewhere. It took me the other day. I live about 50 miles west of Toronto. It takes me 3 hours to get there if I want to drive.
Wow.
That's insane.
And you won't catch any argument from me on Nova Scotia. I mean, that's why we decided, it's time to get out of here. I mean, it was so incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And even I mean, my rent went from, I think, 1,300 to 35 overnight. Everything was so expensive. The tax in itself, I mean, what a breath of fresh air when I got out to Alberta. But one of the things, so as I prepared for this episode, and keep in mind that, we do kind of have somewhat of a focal point on financial planners and advisors,
Sure.
very much the ancillary professionals, because it's meant to really start to get people holistically and collaboratively getting advice instead of giving those advice in silos and having all that opportunity cost. You have people like Mark McGrath and all these other great advisors that I regularly see posting for telling, accountants, well, don't just do this because your client's in a corporation, and don't just do that. We need that holistic advice. As as I was preparing for this, and I was trying to understand, are we seeing an actual targeted attack on private business structures, or is it simply a natural evolution of tax policy? Because a lot of the professionals that aren't CFPs, tax lawyers, accountants, wouldn't necessarily be like super familiar with the general GAAR or general
Sure.
anti-avoidance rule. When I read about what it's supposed to be, where it's, even though you're technically following the rules, this is a plan just for tax saving, and that's not what it's meant for. So we're going to ignore your plan and charge you tax anyway. It sounds kind of like something, I guess, that the government should be moving in the direction of cracking down. But at the same time, we know that the politicians are finding ways around this. I mean, Cartney certainly has his share of
Well, they all do.
conflict of interest and everything else. So where
And
where does that
yeah,
line blur between this is a natural evolution and an attack? It feels very much like an attack, and especially on our doctors, as my wife is going back to again. I mean, if Polyev had been elected, she would have had a lot smarter path to kind of like, a red seal for a welder where you write an exam, you have an oversight for a couple of years. Now she's got to go through this astronomical studying and kind of starting from scratch. So where is that blurred line between natural evolution and attack?
there isn't really a blurred line. It's both. But the thing is, if you're looking at tax policy, is it the natural progression of tax policy? It depends what ideological bent you're taking in tax policy. If you're taking a Friedrich Hayek, Margaret Thatcher, arguably Donald Trump approach to tax, which is it should be as low as possible, the Laffer curve argument, all that kind of stuff, that's not what we're doing. So when I was doing my LLM, we used to see all this early, what a lot of what Canada adopted would come out of Australia. Australia has one of the most left-wing autocratic governments in the Western world, and they have introduced of late wealth taxes, tax on unrealized gains. That's the kind of stuff that
Including the home equity tax?
oh yeah, that's the
And
kind
speak
of
to that
stuff
for a
that
moment, because when I mention it, I get kind of persecuted from anybody around me that's kind of like, just non-financial industry friends are like, "Well, where's the proof of that?" And I
because
can't even find any proof
there's
online of these
position papers
conversations we
inside
had.
there's finance position papers. There's inside the caucus papers. I remember last election there was some guy leaked it out of New Brunswick. There was a liberal MP from New Brunswick who leaked stuff. It's been kicking around in liberal circles for years. A lot of us, conventionally would say, well, that's the third rail politically if they're going to do that, because the last vestige of hope for a successful retirement in Canada is home ownership. Um, I would argue that if the Canadian sheeple if the polls are correct, if Carney is as popular as he seems to be, and he can, either coerce or attract a couple of these NDP types over to the across the bench or across the aisle, and has a majority, or rolls the dice in a year and gets a majority, I think they'll do it. I don't think you have situations like, for instance, BlackRock in the U.S. wants to own, was it 60-70% of residential real estate? That's there. I mean, that's the policy stuff from the left that seems to be getting in certain countries more momentum. I mean, I wish we had followed what Milei was doing in Argentina, and you look at how their economy, that was 5% GDP growth, because he's gone and done the right things. He's taken a chainsaw to government. Now, is it also going after business? Yeah, and that's more of the procedural side. So CRA, it's a stacked deck, right? And I've got friends at CRA, auditors, all kinds of folks. I talk policy with them. They're fun, um, but they have had for years this thing called the reverse onus. So in Canada, you are allowed to, according to the Duke of Westminster, structure your affairs in such a fashion as to minimize your tax. Well, that has been watered down year after year after year, because in terms of tax procedure, until you get to tax court, you are guilty until proven otherwise. You have to prove your case. Now, with the way that CRA works and the way that CRA develops audits and all that kind of things, using the algorithms and all that kind of stuff, they pretty much know what you're doing. So in this day and age, and particularly with the advent of artificial intelligence, that rule that you should have to prove your own case is really a dinosaur at this point. But nobody in this country, because again we are sheeple, has stood up and said, "Hey, hold on. It's time for this to change. They changed it in the U.S. It's a tough burden, but it's the IRS that has to prove its case. Here, not so much. Now, what they do also is they have a number of tools that they can use. For instance, if you go to tax court and proceed against the government and you're successful, unlike normal litigation where you'd recover your costs, you have to prove malice to get your costs. So they have this great, wile e. coyote anvil that they can drop on people, and they do. Then add to it the reworked GAAR rules. Now, I haven't seen it used that often, but it is an absolute nuclear option. So GAAR used to be no penalties. They put you back to go, and they had to prove a three-pronged test that basically it was an avoidance transaction directed to create a tax benefit, and you had to be able to show that they had perverted sort of a section of the act. Well, now it's not. Now it's this omnibus, we'll just use it, and your only defense is an economic substance argument. So
When did
that
that transition happen?
it went live last year. So it's been around with us for almost 2 years, and I haven't seen a lot of litigation or case law on it. But I think also a lot of the auditors out there, they've thrown a ton of money at CRA, but there's a lot of auditors who just don't know if they're coming or going. Like if you say TOSI to them, their head will blow off their shoulders. They don't know. So there's a period of time where they've got to get up to speed. They're not there yet. But tax administration in this country is one of probably the greatest single impediment to productivity. You're crushing, you're crushing entrepreneurialism just because of our high rates. But then add on just the tax, leviathan as the tax department, which is crushing the soul and the wind out of their sails. And you talk to entrepreneurs across the country, you're going to hear that. Banks don't care. Bell Canada doesn't care. But mom and pop do, and that's why you're seeing. I mean, we're both hearing it from clients: a steady exodus of human and real capital out of the country. I mean, they're not coming back. When you hear that, there are doctors coming to Canada from the United States, well, the CBC is telling you that. So just it's probably not true. But
I've heard an ongoing debate about that online, and I'm not
there's
sure.
hundreds of doctors who are leaving for every one that shows up. And then business owners are even more. Like I talk to business owners all day. Now you mentioned accountants. I speak accountant. I spend most of my day talking to accountants. Accountants are historians. Most accountants either are afraid to or do not understand tax. They certainly don't understand tax strategy. Some do. Most of them are there to say no. And perhaps they're right because they know their client, but a lot of it is institutional. So there are very prudent, safe means to reduce tax, both on active income, more so on the estate side. And that's where I live a lot of the time, is restructurings and corporate estate planning and all that kind of stuff. And prudently done. And again, I follow a fiduciary standard, which I think is what the insurance and financial planning industry needs. I think that you can do great work for clients. And as I've said, I mean, I'm a zealot, and in the Catholic Church, they call it holy orders. I just believe in doing that. There's no reason to do nothing. And because the consequences of inaction, particularly upon death of a shareholder, are massive.
Well, let me dive into that a little bit, because one of the things that I've come to realize is that in entrepreneurs, all the way down to the sole proprietor tradesman to the people I see now, they've been at a company for 20 years now, they're being sold that company, their income's all of a sudden going from 120 to 900,000.
Yep.
A lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs and self-employed in this country wait way too long to get any advice, let alone collaborative advice.
Yep.
And so with all of these kind of this new GAAR focus, what new reputational or compliance or planning risks do you see that clients are going to have that aren't getting advice, and the ones that are getting advice,
Well,
what
I think
risks are their advisors facing if they're not necessarily, let's say that they're not working with someone like yourself and they're just trying to do some clever stuff to make a commission or whatever else? I'm not suggesting
yeah.
that's
Well,
the case,
that's
but like, what are
that's
some of the risks there for advisors and
so
the clients that are not getting advice? I think it's already been messy for them trying to catch
gold,
up the mess for not
the golden
advice.
rule of tax planning is pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Right. So you get people who want to pay nothing. Sorry, folks, it's the price of civilization. But we can prudently when I do postmortem planning, integrating capital dividend planning, which is life insurance, we can get people routinely down to be between 6 and 14%. Certainly, certain occasions zero. You can achieve zero, but it's usually smaller companies, medical corporations, things like that.
6 to
Um,
14 still feels pretty glorious from
yeah,
where
well, it's if your capital gains rate is 26.7% in Ontario, that's one choice. Your dividend tax rate's between 39 to 49. If you do nothing and wait more than 3 years, then you could pay up to 75% or something like that. That doesn't really happen. But then, of course, the problem is the insurance industry. Insurance pays really well. And the problem is that it has attracted what I call masters of financial alchemy, to use my iambic pentameter, bullshit artists. And they're really well paid. And the actual level of their acumen is press hard, make three copies. Clients don't know that. Accountants are right to get their backs up, but they don't understand it either. So what we try to do, it's consultative. It's let's rip this. So I start everything backwards, right? I apologize to the client saying, look, I'm a lawyer. I can't, write my name in less than 3 pages. Uh, I usually write a 12 to 15 page covering discussion paper where I say, okay, this is what the battlefield looks like. So if you do nothing, here's how tax works. How does refundable tax work? All that kind of stuff. I end up explaining to them what a hybrid pipeline is, right? That's most of where the domestic planning goes. And then we're getting all kinds of other stuff because people are leaving. So we're doing, departure planning and all that kind of stuff, or contingency safe haven planning. I'm still doing, because I was well known for individual pension plans and retirement compensation arrangements. I still dabble in that area. They work in concert with other things, but I think the critical element, if we're looking at our industry, because compensation is always an issue, I tell folks, I said, look, I wish that every regulator would adopt a fiduciary standard. I have adopted one. If you want to know what the compensation is on what is proposed, we tell them to the penny. I never get all of it. I work with a concert of advisors and accountants and lawyers, and all professional fees get paid and things like that. So it's completely above board. But clients get their backup. Also, because you can't hold insurance in your hand, there's always been some dubious sort of contempt for it. But if you read between the lines in the Income Tax Act, it's Canada is the most pro-insurance jurisdiction or country in the G7, without a doubt. And that's how things are structured. So as long as the client understands, okay, and I start with them, I said, look, I'm going to throw words and terms at you, but if you remember one thing when it's corporate estate planning, the most important value is the capital dividend account. And that's what we start with. And then we've got proprietary software where we can show exactly what we need using pretty straightforward assumptions to make sure that we get that tax down to, as I said, between 6 and 12 or 13%. So, and we take the time, as you do. This isn't something that's sold in an hour. The process is usually several meetings. We invite the accountants in. Occasionally, you'll get accountants who just get their back up and don't know. We try to, educate them. Once in a while, I got to run them over. But that's par for the course, right? So it's an educative approach. It's consultative. It's got to be that way because you're talking about people's life work and trying to sell them the largest policy out there because of this doomsday scenario that you painted with the use of Excel. I would argue opens yourself up to the great Götterdämmerung called the litigation lawyer, the plaintiff lawyer.
somebody like a Harold Geller.
Yeah, he's great. I've talked to Harold on many occasions. He's a great guy. And there's others out there. I keep threatening my friends that my retirement is I'm going plaintiff side. But I don't really want to do litigation. I articled in the litigation shop and, not to besmirch the profession, but it is the most non-results oriented business in the world. All you're doing is you're not solving problems, or at least not until the retainer is replenished many times over. So.
So for somebody on the insurance side, maybe they're working on a big policy for a business owner, there is some risk there in a real way if they're not consulting with someone like you. And if
Yeah.
they consult with someone like you, they may even end up potentially coming out better than they would have
Well,
on their own
when
as
we
far as
build these things, Sheldon, I've got retained actuaries, numbers guys. I mean, I worked for actuaries for years, but I'm a self-confessed enumerate. What you've got to stress test this stuff. So when we do a lot of leveraged insurance because an entrepreneur, so immediate financing arrangements, which is just a reworking of the old London Life Freedom 55 structure. And so the proposition to a entrepreneur is I take them through the process and we do 2 or 3 meetings. They make it through the discussion paper and all that kind of stuff. And the accountants are won over and they say, okay, Trev, you know what you're talking about. I need X amount of coverage because this is what we do pursuant to a 164.6 loss carryback, et cetera, et cetera. But I can take that $500,000, million, 100,000, whatever it is, and put it into one of my own projects. And I'm going to get a way better return than even the best performing whole life par policy. And I'm going to say, absolutely. So do both. And that's where the power of leveraged insurance works. But again, when you get into that world, you are stepping up on the risk plateau because you're borrowing, and the client has to understand that. So we stress test. We've got 48 stress tests in the software. I'm very close with a number of bankers. So the process has to be, exhaustive. But it works, and it's not for everyone. Like I would say, most medical doctors should never consider leverage because, to paint with a wide brush, they get out of school in their mid-30s. They buy a house too big, too expensive. They get into debt trouble, and then they try to, borrow their way out of it. So for them, it's just learn to save. Right?
I've seen
Dentists, you have to teach them about the qualified small business corporation rules and how to sell. But entrepreneurs, I love that. I was doing a talk in Markham a few months ago, and someone asked me, "Who's your model client?" I said, "Entrepreneurs, pissed off ones. There's lots of them." And we can safely navigate the Income Tax Act. We're not going to do aggressive planning. There's stuff out there that I've got the capability to do that is absolutely wonderful from a tax reduction perspective, but it's not for everybody. So that's a know your client exercise. Okay, will they understand this? Because sometimes they won't. So we have to back it off to a simpler solution. And maybe the results are not as robust, but the results are still tangible.
So that we can agree that there's kind of somewhat broad strokes that you can make on certain things in finance,
Sure.
but really the ultimate 2 words, again, that we always mention on this podcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it depends. It's always specific to the client. It's hard to use a real objective ultimate painting of the brush. Certainly that journey you've talked about for doctors, and I've seen it in a lot of dentists and clients that I've had countless times, where they come out, they just, they're all of a sudden making all this money. They're you know spending like crazy and
Yep.
accumulating a bunch of debt, and then they go to take out anything that they've had, and then I'm trying to like restructure everything on the lending side to avoid them taking out the assets under management, and it becomes and it's interesting because a lot of the times these wealth advisors that I'm trying to save the AUM coming out, and obviously trying to avoid the client taking that out for their own financial planning goals, they have not talked to the clients in 7, 8, 9 months
Yeah.
while they've accumulated this. So there is some client engagement opportunities there. I think obviously in our best practices and the way that we manage clients, but also technology can help out with some of this to get some kind of signifying triggers. That's something I'm working on the technology side where, yeah, I mean, if somebody gets to the point where they've got whatever the number is, 10, $20,000 on a credit card, and they've made minimum payments for 3 months, that's an easy technological trigger, but that's never going to come from the banks because the banks want you to do that. They want you to make the minimum payments. This is like
Yeah.
their ideal situation.
Oh, the
And
banks
that
are not
goes
your
back to
friend.
that whole data thing that we're trying to open up that the Canadian Bankers Association keeps making difficult.
Well, I mean, after the tax system, the banking system is the second biggest bulwark to profitability in this country. Right. So I totally agree with you. Clients have to have that moment of self-realization. They have to personal responsibility. We can help them with that, but they have to want to challenge things and change behavior in many cases. And we're not asking them to step into the fast lane of, advanced tax planning. A hybrid pipeline, in my opinion, is not advanced tax planning. Most advisors can't do it, but that doesn't mean it's difficult. It is a series of steps, all supported by.
Expand on that because it's the second time you've mentioned that term, and for a lot of us ancillary financial professionals, especially those of us that are smart enough to want to engage collaboratively and bring people in like yourself, not just introduce to an insurance person, but make sure that they're getting introductions to somebody like yourself as well. What do you mean by that hybrid
Okay,
pipeline?
so a hybrid pipeline is basically taking all of the postmortem strategies that are available, integrating capital dividend planning, and mashing them together. And so what we start with, because what we start with the assumption that most active businesses become passive investment holding companies.
Mhm.
So for a period of years, using a relatively conservative rate of return, our financial planning software will give us key values, as in what's the accumulated CDA, capital dividend account, what are the refundable dividend tax on hand pools. So a
This is
lot of
not,
people,
and this approach is not typical. You'd say more often than not, there's not that hybrid approach.
no, I mean, good planners and strategists are doing this. The average press hard make three copies insurance guy doesn't know what this is. They hopefully they'll give me a call, being the pompous ass that I am. But I mean, what ends up happening is that the first step, and you have timelines in which you have to do this. You have a deemed disposition upon second death. So you've got rollovers. At some point, you get that capital gain. So you have about, let's say, 26% tax right there. What's going to happen at that point is that there is going to be a series of steps that are going to be taken. You will have had insurance put into the right corporation, usually a passive holdco. You've usually financed it, all that kind of stuff. So you get that capital dividend account created. What's going to happen is that within 3 years of the death of the shareholder, you're going to redeem enough shares from the estate on a taxable basis, because it's considered a deemed dividend. So we need it to be a taxable dividend to get all our refundable tax back. So refundable tax gets generated all the way along as the company generates investment returns or receives dividends from non-related parties. So you're going to have, in most cases, these pools are millions of dollars. If you don't act, the government doesn't give you your money back. So a lot of accountants will say, I'm just going to do a pipeline. And a pipeline is a reorganization that wipes out the dividend piece, but leaves the capital gain intact. But the problem is, once you've wiped out the dividend, you don't get your refundable tax back. So you give it to the government. So we start with the basic assumption that we want refundable tax back. So we get it all back. Then what happens is we then match that dividend with a further redemption of shares, electing a capital dividend. Now our dividend rate went from, let's say, 42 to 21. We then do something called loss carryback. Loss carryback is when you redeem the shares out of the estate, you create a loss, they refile the terminal return, it takes out the capital gain. So now we're left with 20, let's say 21% effective rates of tax. Well, what it ends up happening is all that refundable tax came back into the company. You then pipeline, and that extracts everything without tax. So your effective rates of tax go down dramatically. And then a few of my actuarial friends who are, brilliant, one in your hometown who I've worked with as in your current hometown, who I saw yesterday, has means to reduce the tax even further, again, through prudent actuarial measures. So Canadian entrepreneurs need to understand that, okay, you don't walk around talking about tax planning all day. There are people out there that can do this. Your advisor may not know it, but has access to them. They can call you, they can call me, and we can put together that group that will, as I said, in a consultative fashion, come in and solve the problems.
So
And it,
let me ask you two things on that then.
yeah,
One, not for the enterprise, because we know that most of the time they're getting it. They've got the family offices and everything else. Small to mid, what percentage of people that need it are actually getting the opportunity to take advantage of this
tiny,
holistic, of the hybrid, of the proper amount?
tiny, 5-10%. The vast majority of insurance that I see written, even on larger cases, has a slight nod to planning. They basically, what they'll do is they'll calculate the capital gain on the assumed value of the company and say you need this much insurance, and
And and
that's
let's
half
be
the
clear.
job.
Let's be clear for all the insurance folk on here. You're not out here to say you're all a bunch of assholes. You're not,
No, no,
there's
that's
no
just
insurance to
a
be
phone.
sold. You're really going to put them in a better position. Make sure the client has better outcomes. Make sure the client's
Yeah,
stickier. They're getting better advice. They're not going to get those clawbacks, so they're not going to have the litigation issues. You're here to optimize what they're doing, and it could mean making slightly less. It could be making slightly more. But again, long math is king. We leave the
well,
short math to the CEOs of the big banks that come in for 3 or 4 years and gouge and do all this stuff that, yeah, makes a little money in the short term, but loses a bunch of customers, screws up a bunch of stuff on the long term. Long math, this is better for everyone.
Sheldon, teamwork solves problems. It avoids future problems. So if the advisor is just a great relationship guy, knows the client, they're going to tell me what the battlefield looks like. They're going to understand that once we've got them up to speed, their job is to look the client in the eye and say they know what they're doing. They've got your best interests at heart, or the only interest is your interest. That's critical. Does everyone make money? Yes. But and we can do, very handsomely. But the key is that we have solved the long-term problem. The peace of mind factor is huge. You get schemes, right? That all in with particularly with insurance that come along, and then you're going to see our friends at aggressive tax practice come in, because they're not going to rewrite the Income Tax
Those
Act.
schemes are based on pretty deeply believed
Yeah,
ideologies within certain groups,
yeah,
and
sure.
they really believe them with all their heart. They really do believe them with all their heart. I can tell you that for sure.
Oh, they
They
do.
don't think that they're doing schemes. I think, a good portion of the time. I don't know how much.
No, you're right. I mean, people will believe with, wholehearted zealotry that what they're doing is the right thing. But
Well, it's a confirmation bias for sure.
yeah, but CRA, they'll come in with the aggressive tax unit, and they'll blow a lot of this stuff up. So what I'm talking about, hybrid pipeline planning, is boring. It's well established. There's all kinds of interpretation bulletins. We've got, just a wealth of guidance from tax authorities. And it's taking the time to explain that to people. So we say, look, if doing nothing is the worst case scenario, you will get the folks who want to pay, nothing. It can be difficult. Not impossible, but it can be difficult. And again, you've got to measure risk. Like, a lot of folks will enter into a scheme, fully knowing that it's going to get attacked in 5 or 6 years, and they walk into penalties and interest that are worse than the tax. So you've got to be out in front of that. And some people are far more slick than I am in selling it. And it is a sell very much. Whereas, yeah, hey, look, getting paid's great, but it's got to be consultative. You have to be able to, you actually have to provide a solution that the client understands. And I tell them, I mean, so many times in my first meeting, people will say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I say, look, there's a quiz on the third meeting. And I ask you, why are you doing this? And you don't have to cite income tax sections to me, but you need to understand, to some extent, how do the building blocks, how does the Lego go together? And they'll get it, right? And that's where getting the advisor up to speed, helping the accountant, because the accountant, they'll understand how that company works. They'll understand cash flows, they'll understand the client, but they may not understand how the Lego blocks go together. They may not have a tax partner in their firm. So we've got the ability to sort of come in and augment that, and I think it works. Uh, I know it works, because it's a no BS approach. It's fiduciary.
Good. Then I'm gonna ask you three questions as we close,
Yep.
and see if you can kind of round those out at around 3 minutes or less each. First, can you share an example of a structure or plan that would have been prudent governance a few years ago, but that today could trigger scrutiny or penalties or some of this new drama?
Um, Everyone would point to the 10/8s, which are, I guess, have been gone about a decade now, where guys just in the insurance business just got a little too cheeky and too smart. And again, our friends in the banks are largely responsible for them not being available anymore, because they ran around saying we beat CRA. And I'm not going to mention the bank, but they had tied selling. And CRA, when you wave the flag in front of CRA, guess what's going to happen? They're going to act. So that would be one.
Okay, now the second one, I am going to take it upon myself to take all the power of the Dominion of Canada and make you prime minister for the next 3 minutes.
No one wants to. Oh, we're
Merry
done.
Christmas, by the way. Uh, I want you to tell me, you're prime minister for 3 minutes. You're able to implement what you see fit to address some of the issues that you've seen. Not all the one. There's a lot of issues. We could go on about that for 3 days, I'm sure, nonstop, 24 hours a day. However, specifically in regards to what we're talking about, what are
So
some of
this,
the measures that you would have put in place?
so this isn't Trump being dictator on the first day. So what can I do within the context of Canadian law? Uh, I believe the Constitution is the flaw in Canada, that federalism was upended in 1981. And no one wants to talk about the Constitution, but it needs meaningful overhaul, and that includes the enshrinement of property rights in the Constitution. Property is the basis of liberal democracy, and we have property rights. They're just in common law. We need to reassert them, and our Supreme Court is the most politicized bunch of judicial morons that I've ever
Does that
encountered.
influence that home equity tax that could come into play? Does that come into play there, or is that
Well,
kind
yeah,
of
because it would all flow from the rubric of proper defense of property. I mean, there's all kinds of things I would do in Canada. I mean, I would fire half the judiciary. I'd bring back the death penalty. I'd slam the door shut on immigration, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of stuff people would expect me to say, but as a legal scholar,
and with a good sense of history and tax policy and ideology, obviously, I think our foundation is flawed. No one voted on the 1981 Constitution. Quebec has still not accepted it. There was no great plebiscites. The Charter of Rights, first, Canadians don't know what's in it. The Charter of Rights is typical, and it reflects 1980 politics. Like, for instance, affirmative action is enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights. Most people don't know that. That stuff has to stop. We have to get back. Writing laws down less is better than writing them, because then when you write them down, you basically appoint the judiciary to legislate, and that's what's happened.
Okay. And then the last thing, this is going to be kind of a selfish little plug for my technology, but by hopefully something you already believe deeply in your heart, and I think you've already conveyed. I'm working my butt off on a technology where people, whether professionals, will be able to more intelligently collaborate in a digital experience rather than having to be in a family office together. That way, any independent can formulate a true collaborative, holistic family office experience around their clients, big or small. And those clients can now formulate one. What does the importance look like around collaborative? Everything I see in the reputable publications, it's bigger in the US. They're making significantly more revenue. They're making a lot more
But
money.
collaboration and teamwork is it. And if you can create a platform to do it, it's the same logic as make people go back to the office. Things happen when people work or are forced to work together. I don't know everything. I'm not for everyone. I'm not George Costanza. Everyone doesn't have to like me, but it may be a piece of the puzzle, and technology bringing others together, working in that collaborative digital place. I think it's essential, not quintessential. So I fully endorse it. More power to you.
And I'll put in a quick shameless plug for you. I mean, Trevor, I know that you're respected by, again, some of the greatest financial minds in the country. There's a long list of those: Sajal, Jason, Harold. Shout out to Tony Chapman. Give him a follow on LinkedIn as well.
He's great.
Um,
He should be
I
running for office. So should
yeah,
Shay.
I really I make a point to go into LinkedIn specifically to read your posts. I think more than most.
Well, you clearly don't work for a bank, because the compliance department will tap dance on you if you like them. So
No, I spent my 12 years in a bank, and I had to exit because I disagreed with some things that were concerning, and I'm not allowed to talk about
yeah,
because I'm hogtied on that. But I will say that we say it to military all the time, and certainly the dessert first and foremost. But I do want to say thank you for your service, thank you for your
thank
voice, and anyone that, I mean, Trevor is still working with advisors, working with clients for the clients that end up hearing this, even though the financial professionals are our target. This is a guy you want to call. This is a guy you want to get involved with the professionals that you have, and especially for financial professionals of all sorts. And even myself as a mortgage specialist, as I'm getting back because I was, focused on tech, and then I was doing the business development. I'm doing mortgages again as I support my journey through the tech side. I will be making sure to advocate to my clients very strongly, and trust is what streamlines relationships, and you're going to deepen that trust if you're able to bring in people. And bulldogs are great to have. Trevor, there's not just a bulldog and a zealot, but there's a big heart behind the purpose of with which you're pursuing for Canadians, for entrepreneurs. So they can reach you. Obviously, they can look at working with you at trevorparry.com. Is there anywhere
yeah,
else that you
agree
can
with an
plug
A.
where they can reach out, or that's the central conduit?
That's it. Sheldon, thank you very much. This has been fantastic.
Bless you. Appreciate your time so much, and thank you for joining us on Finance Village, where good advice meets meaningful outcomes. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.